The other thing that I've been doing sort of lately was actually collaborating with a number of telecommunication companies, tech companies, etc. And it was nice that I've been had the privilege of seeing how they recruit their staff. And there's one particular company, there was somebody who was interviewing for his post, and it was a pretty sort of senior post. I mean, obviously he was quite young, but was very senior. And his entire talk, was okay. So I went to this particular startup. I can't remember exactly where he started out in Europe. We did this. It failed. I worked out that the next one I was going to do this. Went off to Silicon Valley, did the next one. That failed. Failed at a slightly later stage, but still failed. And his entire talk, right, was a barrage of about 6 or 7 things where he'd failed. And he wasn't trying to, this wasn't part of a failure talk, This was him interviewing for a post. Okay, and it's really, to me, that was a really interesting view that actually we should do that more in medicine. We don't really do that. I mean, because ultimately what he was saying was actually, you know what, I learned the following bits, and eventually, he went off to Amazon, did something pretty spectacular. I actually don't know whether he got the job at the company or not, but he seemed very impressive at the time. So what I think has sort of happened along the way is that my own ability to deal with failure is that I don't really think about it in the same way that I used to. And I only discovered this literally last week when I was trying to chart out my failures, is that I failed on a pretty big grant about 2 weeks ago that I spent most of the summer writing. And I spent probably about 15 minutes actually dwelling on it. And the week after, I couldn't remember that I'd failed it the week before. Now, that may be to do with my subcortical dementia because of and all of the mercury in the sushi that I eat. I don't know, but it's interesting. So that's made me think really about what failure is. Now you can only really talk about failure if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary about what failure is. It's a lack of success. Okay, so that's great, isn't it? That's very clear, right? So success is part of the problem about defining what success is. Now, there are some people, I have colleagues who are very driven by prizes, by titles, by sort of going off to Sweden to receive a nice little chair and your little sort of Nobel Prize, not a little Nobel Prize, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what drives them. And I think on one hand, that's great. For me, I mean, as I say, my structure is very flat. I think Santa Claus gets a slight bump, but otherwise, that doesn't drive me to do what I actually want to do. And so for me, it's actually quite simple in the sense I want to cure motor neuron disease. Knowing full well that I'm going to fail at that, or the chances are I'm going to fail at it. But the difficulty with research, and this is how we think about what success is and how we've been taught to think about what success is and why research doesn't fit in it. Okay, so at school, the premise is that you go, and everybody who's here has clearly succeeded in this front, probably. There's a nice bell curve, we all believe in bell curves. And you get whatever percentage is, and you have succeeded. You get a certificate, tells you you've succeeded. You get into med school, tells you you've succeeded. You get an ACF or an academic fellow, and part of one of the academic programs. And it's very clear what you've that you have succeeded. The difficulty with research is that you don't have that. You don't have that ability to say, actually, you know what success is. And when we were in the lab, or actually in the bar, having been in the lab and everything failing at NIH, there was always the talk that came back to, and I mean, my fellows still have this talk, or I certainly try to have it with them, is this thing about publications, and it's obviously come up a lot today about publications. And we were trying to work out if we were going to design some exchange system. Is one Nature paper equivalent to 10 Brain papers? Or is what is the currency here? So with the question about the Clinician Scientist Award, about what's the minimum grade, as in what are my metrics here? How do I actually sort of construct that? As in how many epidemiology papers equals one a sort of CRISPR paper. Yeah, it obviously doesn't equate. And what I really got down to was actually that lots of this is actually fairly random to some extent. And I don't mean that completely random, but if you look at the curve that sort of Martin was talking about, if you're in an area where you're on that curve is sort of going up, yeah, then the papers can often be in really high impact journals. And we see this with different we see this across the different areas of research. There are things that sort of go in vogue, and there are things that then sort of fall out of vogue. There's obviously external factors that actually go into this sort of with randomness. I mean, there's the bit about whether the person on the panels had a good day or not. You know, whether they've paid attention, whether their child has just been up all night. They're not sort of paying as much attention to your grant review as what you'd hope. Now, the issue about calling things randomness, and I'm not using the word luck. Yeah, because luck is one of those things people think themselves either lucky or not lucky. Randomness is actually randomness. This is useful from a failure perspective, but it's also true to some extent from a success perspective. And as I say, I'm a slight geek, so you can model this. This isn't work that I've done, but there's a really nice paper out a few months ago showing that actually you can take 1,000 people, look at them, 1,000 little computer people, you can model them over their career, you can give them random events every 6 months. Yeah, and you can see what the curve is like at the end. So you get a talent curve, so it's a nice little histogram, and then you can get the success, completely computer generated, right? A very small percentage end up with about 45% of the success. The majority of people don't. They end up with a small amount of success. So our success, we like to think it's all skill, but the reality is that there is a massive element of luck to it. Now, for the people who are thinking, utter crap, right? Yeah, here, you need to get to a certain position, requires a vast amount of skill, right? This, for me, once again, was one of those moments where actually, you know, this is the embodiment of actually randomness to some extent. I'm not going to make any political statements, but it's an important point. I think that sometimes it is a matter of a random occurrence of sequences, and look at what can happen, yeah? I'm not trying to make out that randomness is like we're just being controlled by all of this, yeah? This is something that we're sort of passive in. I mean, that would be silly, but I think what's important is that one of the things about failure is, and this Martin sort of spoke about this, about sort of failure, you can take that very personally, right? So when you submit that grant and it comes back and it's your first PI grant and they slam it and call the hypothesis whatever, yeah? It's hard not to take that personally. But ultimately, there is an element of sort of randomness to it. And I think what's important with that randomness is that you've got to, the more times you throw the dice, or the more times that you actually submit the paper, the more grants you submit, you're just increasing your probability. And that comes back to that resilience, and that comes back to that point of actually sort of trying to persevere through that. So from that failure perspective, from my own perspective, I think that, I mean, I want to continue to fail. I think I would get really quite, if I wasn't failing, I think I would think that I wasn't really pushing myself that much. Now, this isn't that you should go out and just randomly try to do things and just expect to succeed, yeah? I would suggest you do something outside of medicine that you fail at. So for me, I've got this habit of trying to pick some ridiculous sport that I've never done before and try and do it. So I sailed across the Southern Ocean, having never sailed before. Really stupid idea, would not recommend doing that. My current thing is trying to cycle up really big mountains when I'm clearly not built for cycling, yeah? But it's important because it just gives you've got to fail at things. You've got to plan ahead though, right? And you've got to be able to deal with the inevitable sort of punches, right? Now, even Mike Tyson, right, known for his great intellect, made the quote that everybody has a plan until you get a punch in the face. Yeah, and it is completely true. We can all have plans, right? I'm going to do this. This is my life course. Yeah, I'll have my 2.4 kids by this particular time, and so on and so forth. But life doesn't really work that way. Or I guess it hasn't done for me, I guess. So you have to have backup plans, and a number of the speakers have sort of spoken about this. Now, I used to have backup plans which were like A, B, C, D, and E, etc. Yeah, I've stopped doing that because I've realised that I can't. I mean, I was running out of labels, yeah, and I think it's wrong to get to A 1.2 and etc. about the different backup plans that you require. But if you go into so when you're applying for your fellowships, when you're applying for your clinician scientist posts, don't just put all your eggs in that one basket. Work out, if I fail, what am I going to go for next? And if that fails, what am I going to go for next? And just work it all out and see whether the timelines work, but also you can see if it happens or when it happens, because it's going to happen at some point, you have a mechanism to deal with it. So final slide. So from my perspective, what I'd say is actually define your own success. So I wouldn't go looking for it externally. I'd work out what presses your buttons and what actually gives you, what you define as success. It's actually very personal for each individual. For me, as I said, there's a particular disease I want to cure. I know that I'm probably going to lie on my deathbed having failed at that, but that's okay. For me, I want to have some fun each day doing something. So for me, sort of coding's, I really like it, this entire AI thing's fun. There's a lot of interesting bits sort of going on. From the failure point of view, I would say go for it on the failure point of view, yeah? Keep on, do some things where actually you get your ego out of it and you actually do enjoy, it's hard to get to the point that you say, you know what, I really enjoyed failing, yeah? And I still, as much as I try to give the impression that I don't have an ego, when I did stop, actually I haven't told anybody this, when I was cycling up one of these sort of ridiculous mountains, which was at the top was a ski resort, yeah, so it was like a proper mountain as opposed to a hill, and I live in Cambridge, yeah, which has no hills, yeah, it's completely flat. I did stop a couple of times, and I remember thinking, shit, I really would have liked to have just gone up this without stopping. But it is important to fail.